Okay, hey everybody. Here we're now on to part two. I already sorted these games, these Final Fantasies, and a few others on the last part. So if you missed that, go check that out. So we are going to get started with sorting some more RPGs. I think I probably have maybe one more of these videos after this one, and I should be mostly complete on the RPGs that I've played. Okay, so let's get into it. Fire Emblem Three Houses. I would say this is probably B. I could maybe also see C. It could be like a B minus. It's a playable tactics video game. Uh, Nothing about it is like incredibly good, but everything is kind of okay. The balance is a big problem, and that's rooted in the fact that it has this permadeath thing that they've had since the beginning with Fire Emblem. In the beginning, it asks you, "Do you want permadeath on or off?" And I was just like, "Oh, so this game is unbalanceable." In other words, because there's no way you can balance a game with both permadeath on and off. Um, and in fact, my main character became godlike and I fell off around 30 something hours in. But it was enjoyable enough. The dating stuff is fun and yeah, it was fine. So I would say probably it's a B. So let's get into Dragon Quest. I have very similar opinions about almost all of the Dragon Quest games. Um, Probably gonna put Dragon Quest 1 into D. It's a lot like Final Fantasy 1, but you have only one character. It's even more of a rudimentary story. Very, very little going on. Very little. I mean, it's a very short game. It's very simple and direct, but I don't know, like I could see an argument for it being in C, but it's just not much to love in here. Not much to hate either, I guess, but it's a very elemental game. Dragon Warrior 3, on the other hand, is probably a B, or even an A, maybe. Very, very cool early RPG. The best thing about this game is the class system. It has one of the best early job systems. One detail I remember about it is that there's one job called Fool, and like Final Fantasy 1, it has a thing where later game you can like advance your classes, your jobs to another job. And the Fool advances to the Sage, which is like the best class in the game, like this super powerful mage. So it's kind of a neat little idea. There's a lot of cool stuff in Dragon Warrior 3, aka Dragon Quest 3. Very cool game. Let's talk about Dragon Quest 9. Let's see, that would also be B or C. I would probably have to put it in B, I guess. It's still got a really good soundtrack. All the Dragon Warriors quests have great soundtracks. Except for 11 actually might be an exception to that for me. I'm not sure what happened with that one. I think the composer was very old by that point. But yeah, so 9 is a Nintendo DS game. Very solid. It has like a class system. I didn't beat it. I got about like 35 hours in, and at some point I was just like, okay, I'm tired of this. I mean, all the Dragon Warrior games, Dragon Quest games have this issue of they don't really have a main character or a main plot. They're kind of like you're kind of a not much of a character and you're just going from town to town, place to place. Like there's some problem that's local to this area and you solve that problem and then you move on to the next area. And it's almost like episodic feeling. And so it's easy to fall off of them for that reason, in my opinion. So that's Dragon Quest 9. Dragon Quest 11 is a lot worse, I would say, overall than 9 or 3. And that's because it's just over polished. It's one of the most conservative ones of all of them. It's extremely polished, like it's very smooth and it feels nice to play, but it's just so safe. I mean, they have these skill trees that are just very, very boring. To me, it's just a very boring game, but very well made. Yeah, it's sort of unfortunate. It really feels like they need to spice it up a lot. And I think they are for number 12, but we'll see how that goes. And those are the 4 Dragon Quest games that I've played. I'm not a huge Dragon Quest guy, mainly because of the plot is so scattershot and because soundtrack's not as good. There's no main character, but they have some really cool things. They're worth knowing about for sure. Okay, next up is Divinity Original Sin 2. This is going to be a controversial one, but I'm actually going to put this into C. I have failed after many, many attempts to get through the first island of Divinity Original Sin 2. I think Larian had a lot of really good ideas, and they haven't really come together until Baldur's Gate 3. which we will talk about. But yeah, the biggest problem with Divinity Original Sin 2, I have a little bit of problems with the world and the lore and the narrative. I just didn't get sucked in by that. But the biggest problem is the armor system, because this is a very combat oriented game. And they have this armor system where you have actually two armor bars. You have a physical damage armor bar and a magical damage armor bar. And what that means is anytime you do damage to a character, you have this question in the back of your mind of was this going to be wasted damage? And that's kind of their purpose of these two bars, is that you want to generally have, focus all your magic guys on one guy to be most efficient. But in practice, if you have like a normal party that has a normal distribution of damage types, you're going to end up wasting some damage. You're going to end up doing some physical damage, even though you eventually punch through on the magical damage bar, and that physical damage is now wasted. So you kind of, anytime you do damage, you have that question in the back of your mind. And I just think that while I could see the argument that it's interesting, I think it's too disruptive to the basic pattern of, click, deal the damage. Now the damage is dealt. And so I would say that's a huge problem for the game, in my opinion. All right, next up we have Baldur's Gate 1, which is going to be a D. I'm fairly sure about that, if not an F. I think F should be reserved maybe for these games. But yeah, Baldur's Gate 1. So I should say I have yet to be sucked in by a BioWare game. I have tried the first 1 to 3 hours of many BioWare games and bounced off every time. I don't know what it is about their style of writing, their style of world building. It just has yet to resonate with me. Part of it is the combat system. So Baldur's Gate was the first game to create the Infinity engine, which plagued Planescape Torment, an otherwise amazing S-tier video game. But it's this real time with pause, and it's not just real time with pause. It's like the worst form of real time with pause. So the combat is horrible. The lore and setting is extremely boring, in my opinion. And I played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and this is also going to be controversial. I understand a lot of people said Baldur's Gate 2 is a really great RPG, and maybe some people would put it very high. I haven't been able to get very far into Baldur's Gate 2, and in the beginning, both of these games just sort of feel like almost like an old school, like I'm playing like a Gauntlet or something. I'm just running around in a field and there's just like mobs of random monsters running at me, and then I'm real time, my guys are all killing them, and I'm like, what is this? It's very fighty for a game that has the Infinity engine. It has a ton of fights, but like so many people have told me that this game is good that I will bump this up into C, just like because I haven't played that much of it. I would say though, from my vantage point, what I've seen of it, it has not seemed very much more interesting than the first game. And then we have Baldur's Gate 3, which definitely is A, if not S. I think I'm going to give it A and not S. I just got through this. I actually did not finish it, but I think a big reason for that is I was in the early access and I played the game twice through the first chapter in early access. I've been following this game very excitedly. It definitely gets an A because you can push monsters into holes, Oro style. And I generally think the tactical combat is some of the most fun in any tactical RPG I've played. There's a lot about the writing is like pretty good script wise. I think the worst thing about Baldur's Gate 3 is the D&D license. I think really holds it back. The Forgotten Realms is just not that interesting. And then there's all this like, oh, you're a Githyanki, I don't like those people, like all this like fantasy racism stuff. It's just very boring and stupid, and a lot of time is wasted on that. And yeah, I didn't finish it. I just didn't feel that compelled. A big part of that is that your protagonist, your main character, ends up kind of not really being that much of a character driving the story. They're just kind of and this is a problem with the Western style, like you decide what happens kind of concept. I have a couple of other issues with Baldur's Gate 3, but fantastic game. I think Larian really finally brought their whole what's it called, Divinity Original Sin concept together with this game in a way that really worked. And obviously it's one of the most lauded games of this year for good reason. Okay, Suikoden 1. I liked it. I don't have a ton to say about it. I'm actually starting to play Suikoden 2 right now as part of the book club over at the KB Games Discord, which is going really well. It's been fun. But I really liked Suikoden. I thought it was a very solid JRPG, good music. The plot was good enough. I still remember some of the characters and stuff. There's this whole base building mechanism where you find a bunch of people throughout the world and add them to your base. There is a problem with that game, and I think Suikoden 2 is going to have the same problem where there's just too many characters, and so the characters and the abilities kind of get a little bit dull in the way that like Pokemon abilities are kind of dull. Characters are more like spreadsheet entries than they would be in, say, Final Fantasy 10 or 13. So that's a little bit disappointing, but it's a very charming game, very solid game. I recommend it. Paper Mario. Now I actually wanna rank Paper Mario kind of low. It's a charming game. I didn't get terribly far in it. I'm gonna rank it kind of low though because a couple of tropes in RPG design have emerged because of Paper Mario that I really despise. In the context of Paper Mario, I don't hate them that much, but them leaking out into other games is very irritating to me. One of those is that the concept of the overmap being like a platforming game. So that kind of makes sense in Paper Mario, where it's like a Mario jokey kind of game. But then like Sea of Stars came out this year, and it has the same thing. Like the overmap is like you're doing these like jumpy puzzles on the overmap, and then same thing with Sea of Stars. Is the press a button at the right time to deal more damage or to dodge damage. I really can't stand that. I really think it has nothing to do with the core thing that you're doing in an RPG. And it's like, to me, it strikes me as almost like an admission that the designers don't think these systems are interesting. And so they are like, well, what if we gave you like a little mini rhythm game to play while you're playing this? And so I really resent that as a design trope. Paper Mario is a very well made game. You know, it by itself, like I would probably say maybe it's a B. But I'm gonna put it into C because of the tropes that it has popularized, which I think are really harmful. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, same deal, but even worse. Because this one has the overmap puzzles are very irritating and boring. I tried playing this this year or last year, and I fell off about 5 hours in. I should also add that all the Mario RPGs are too simple. They're just a little bit too simple for an RPG, I think. There's just not enough stuff going on that you can mess around with and play around with in like the party building stuff. And but the worst thing about Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, and I know there's like 5 other games in this series, I have yet to play them, and I don't know if I will. But the worst thing about this game is that it has forced mini games. And I actually bailed when I found one forced mini game where I had to like jump rope, and it was an execution slash memory contest. And it was like actually slightly hard, like just hard enough to be irritating. And so I just bailed at that point. I was like, you know what? Honestly, nothing in this game so far has shown me that it'd be worth it for me to go through this stupid mini game. So I'm out. And I don't know if I'm going to play another Mario based RPG. I just feel like the basic premise of the Mario RPG concept is that it's like a simplified RPG. And I think that honestly, most RPGs are too simple, actually. Like that's the wrong direction to go. I do think they're charming. They have good writing. They're funny, but that's not enough for me. I need like, you know, like I've said in the last episode, I need the stuff to matter. I need it to feel like this is an important story, and you could tell that story in the Mario universe. And maybe they do, but I'm not sort of getting that from what I've seen. All right, next up is Valkyria Chronicles. I just played this year or last year. It's not a B. This would probably be a C, I guess, or maybe even a D, actually. It's a very awkward combat system. It's not like anything I've played in any other game, but in my opinion, it's like a very ugly, weird design choice kind of game. Um, you're like toggling from an overmap view and then like going into this sort of real-time space and shooting. It maybe they ironed it out for the later versions. I also have Valkyria Chronicles 4, so if you at home say like, oh, you got to check out 4, they've really ironed out this system, makes a lot more sense, then maybe I'd check that out. But two other complaints I have. One is that I almost feel like this is barely even an RPG. It's just like mission, 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 mission. It almost feels more like playing like Advance Wars or something. I know that it starts to get some RPG elements, but it's yeah, that's one issue. And then the other issue is it's just a very dreary, like World War II kind of feeling world. It's not appealing. Like it's one of these games where I'm like, what am I hoping for here? And I also just found that I found that it had this problem that a lot of games have. Oh, this reminds me, is Yakuza Like a Dragon on here? I gotta check. I don't think it is. That's unfortunate. Well, I'll have to add that for next time. Because I have spicy takes on Yakuza Like a Dragon, but you can read that. I wrote a whole review on it on my website. Yeah, it struck me as like falling off of its own plot really early on and just becoming like mission, 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 mission. So I don't know. Maybe this doesn't even belong in the RPG category, but I was not a big fan of Valkyria Chronicles. All right, let's keep going. Witcher 3, a very popular game. I would put it in either C or D for me. I might go D just because the thing that I really hate about The Witcher is the world is extremely depressing and like fascisty feeling to me. I really don't like the world at all. The combat system is terrible, not satisfying, not interesting. It's also one of these like CRPGs. Now, I think every CRPG kind of has this problem. Not every CRPG, but like most Western RPGs have this problem where they have this choices and consequences concept, which in and of itself is fine. It's like, yeah, okay, you make choices and there's consequences in the universe. That kind of sounds cool. But then you couple that with this like Gen Xer style, like really depressing, cynical, and also edgelordy kind of aesthetic. So it's always like, do you want to kill two babies or burn down a town? You know, like those are their ideas of like interesting choices. And to me, those choices are not interesting. It's very like people who are impressed by the trolley problem kinds of problems. And and Witcher 3 was very much like that. It's very edgelordy. And I have very little patience for that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm gonna give that one a D for sure. Kingdom Hearts. Um, it's gonna be a C or a D. Um, let me think about it as a C real quick. I feel like it's probably a D. And the reason for that is, and I've only played Kingdom Hearts 1. I saw a bunch of 3 played, and I thought 3 seemed even more atrocious than 1. Let me first talk about the good thing about Kingdom Hearts. As far as I can tell, there's just one thing that's kind of good about it. And that's that the combat system is actually like really satisfying and like fun in a very basic way to engage with. And the RPG kind of system that goes along with that is pretty fun. Like when you're doing combat, the game is at its most fun, I think. But almost everything else in the game is like very irritating and nonsensical, and you just get the feeling that it's really written down. Like it's one thing for there to be a game that's like sort of for kids. Like you might say that Paper Mario is for kids, but Paper Mario doesn't feel written down in the way that Kingdom Hearts kind of does to me. And then also on top of that, I gotta put it in D just because the Disney, the Disney to me is like such a stain on things now. Like I don't even watch Pixar movies anymore because it's like my feeling is like, you know what? Even if this new Pixar movie is good, I don't even want to watch it. Even if this new Disney movie is good, I'm just not interested because it's just like we're too saturated, and Disney as like this corporation, I don't know, it just doesn't have the appeal that it had 20 years ago. And also the whole concept with Kingdom Hearts is kind of like, well, what if there was a game with like Disney characters and like Donald Duck was hanging out with Cloud from Final Fantasy VII, and I'm like, why? Well, why is that? Why would I want that? And indeed, when you go and play it, it's like all the characters are these weird, hollow versions of themselves. It's very uncomfortable, and yeah, and there's a lot of busy work stuff to it. So yeah, can't say I'm a fan, unfortunately. Okay, let's get into some of these. These are some Elder Scrolls games that I've played. Daggerfall. Now, if I'm being honest, as a game, it's gonna be a B or a. It's definitely a B or a C. although it deserves S for its ambition for sure. So I'm gonna go with a B because I really appreciate more than I want to play Daggerfall. I appreciate a lot of things. In some ways, it's the most ambitious video game ever made. I think it has the largest land mass of any game ever made still to this day, and part of that's because a lot of it is randomly generated. But like the dungeons and stuff are randomly generated, and they're huge. It's like this is a rare video game where you can get sincerely lost in one of its dungeons. That's something that doesn't exist. That's not a thing that happens, you might say, for the best. That does not happen in modern video games at all, but it does happen in Daggerfall, and Daggerfall is just very open, simulationist, systemic. It's very bold, and it's tricky to play now because the balance is wonky. The UI is very old school, but I still would say this is definitely at least a B, if not an A. But I'm gonna say it's a B because it's also got some real weaknesses that aren't tech or old game related. I mean, like in terms of like the story and narrative and that kind of stuff, it's very sparse. And so yeah, I'm gonna give this one a B. But I really appreciate it a lot. Morrowind is Bethesda's best game for sure. I'm probably gonna put it in an A. I could even see a case made for it that it's an S. I think the one thing that would keep it out of an S for me is that there's a lot of NPCs who say the same stuff. And that's really kind of blech. And the combat is not great. It's like pretty smushy, unsatisfying combat. But other than that, this is a fantastic game. I mean, this game, like, first of all, this has one of the best, telling of lore by showing, and like there's these Dwemer ruins in the game throughout the game, and it really does a great job of like hinting at those and making you interested and curious about those. That's really cool. It's still very systemic and emergent the way that Daggerfall is, but it's also a little more playable. Like I think that Daggerfall is very like raw, systems. And Morrowind's a little bit more of like a video game, a little bit, which is kind of a good mix. I think this was like their best inflection point between those two poles. And so yeah, I do recommend Morrowind for sure. It's a little bit chonky in certain ways, but just go with it. Yeah, very, very cool, interesting game. I think if you really get used to the UI and how it plays, you will not regret going into Morrowind at all. Oblivion gets a D, if not an F. Maybe Oblivion gets an F. I think Oblivion maybe gets an F. Because Oblivion, I think it does get an F because it really started, for me, it really was the game where Bethesda decided to cut with the ambition, like make everything way, way toned down, way more like console-ified, much more conservative, and all of the exciting things about Daggerfall and Morrowind were like basically shaved off for Oblivion. And then on top of that, they have like these new features like the persuasion system, which is, I think, in video game history should, be on a list of like most terrible design choices. Really, really awful. And yeah, and I can't say much good about it really. So I think Oblivion needs to be an F, both because of the game that it is, but also because of the tropes that it sort of started. I mean, this is where everything is like a green arrow, which now we all just accept it. This is just how all console games are now, but like just follow the green arrow kind of thing and fast travel anywhere to anywhere from anywhere. Morrowind, I should go back real quick and just mention that it had a cool fast travel thing where you could fast travel, but you can only fast travel to and from certain points. There are these silt striders that they're basically like big bugs that are function as taxi cabs, and you have to pay money to use them, number one, and they would only take you from point A, a certain point on the map, to another point on the map. So that meant that you had to still do a lot of actual walking, and the people would complain about this and be like, oh, I just have to like sit there walking. But honestly, that's one of those things where by fixing it, you are also losing a lot. So, I'm not sure that this was the exact right answer, but it was a lot better than just letting players fast travel at any point like you can in most games now. Okay, Wizardry 8. This is a cool ass video game. Definitely a B or even maybe an A. I might put it in B because it's just a little bit too rough around the edges, but I don't know. I'm tempted to put it in an A. So this is Surtech, and they also, you might know them from Dragon Alliance. They have very like good voice acting. It's one of the earliest games that had like voice acting you would keep on because it's actually funny and well delivered. Funny dialogue, a very weird, interesting combat system where you have a sort of like a grid of was it six or eight party members, and they're kind of, you're walking around in real time. It sort of plays like Morrowind or Oblivion, but you're actually a whole party. And so that has all these weird ramifications. Then when you go into combat, it's turn-based. So it's a very strange game, but very ambitious, extremely difficult. That's actually one of my downsides for it, is that most players who play this are going to get brick walled at some point. Even I remember looking up a guide on what to do and still not being able to proceed beyond a certain point, but I loved it up until that point. Very cool game. I actually have not played many of the other Wizardries other than just, for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just see what they are. But Wizardry 8, very cool. I was very sad to see Surtech go, along with Black Isle, Origin, and a bunch of other really cool companies. Let's do Ultima 7 next. This would also be a B or an A. Now, I think I would probably put it in A, except that the combat is one of the worst. It's maybe worse than the Baldur's Gate combat, which is really saying a lot. But let me first talk about what's good about this game. This is the most systemically intricate and interactive, maybe like RPG ever made, I think. The only games that are more systemically interactive than this would maybe be something like Dwarf Fortress, games that are pure simulations like that. In the RPG space, you cannot find a more simulationist game than Ultima 7. It's the amount of things you can do, and also the way that NPCs behave. Like, I remember when Oblivion came out, they had this thing, they were like, oh, radiant AI. And what that basically meant was like that NPCs would have a route they would travel every day, and like a couple of rules for how they would behave in response to certain things. But Ultima 7 was like that on steroids. There was a lot more of that. There was like weird things, like you could commit a murder in a town, and if nobody saw you, then you'd get away with it. There was also like, I remember this, I have this distinct memory of being in somebody's house. You walk into somebody's house, you close the window blinds, and the NPC might get up after a while and be like, oh, it's drafty in here, and close the window blinds. Or if you open them, they close them. NPCs have jobs. They go to the work during the day, and then they go home at night and go to sleep. They're all like doing stuff. It's very weird and wild how systemic it is. And I should also quickly mention that UO was the only MMO I ever played, was actually also like that in the early days, and really continuing on this project of making these like really systemic NPCs. Very, very ambitious game, very cool, but sadly pretty tough to play because of the combat system and because of just the general old game wonkiness. So I'm going to give it a B for now. All right, we got 3 more to go. We got a couple of games in the Tales of series. Let's do them in the order I played them. So my first Tales of game was Tales of Zesteria, and I hated it. I'm going to put this one in D. I hated the combat system. I didn't really understand the combat system, but I didn't want to understand it because the presentation of it was, I found, really poor. The story and the setting was very off-putting and like weird, felt like a weird mobile game, but like maybe this is a game about like the Bible or something. It was this weird anime, like, I don't know, it really was off-putting, and the characters weren't charming or appealing, and the music was awful, and just everything about it. The UI bugged me. Everything about Tales of Zestiria just really put me off the wrong way. I played it about 5-6 hours, and I was like, I don't enjoy this. I mean, the combat system is this real-time thing, but it's also like this fighting game, like execution-y real-time thing, and there's just all these weird details that are just off to me about Tales of Zestiria. So and nothing about it was compelling to me. But then I played Tales of Berseria. This one I might put in B or C. I might put it in B. I'm going to put it in B because it does one thing really, really right, which I think is so important for RPGs. Uh, and that is to have a strong main character who guides the story. And from the very beginning, you kind of have a sense of what this story is going to be about. This is like the opposite of Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest, it's going to be a big grab bag of stuff, you know. But Tales of Berseria, right out of the gate, you see this main character. She's charming, she's likable, and you're immediately informed this is going to be a revenge story, and that is like a really strong thing that pulls you through the plot as you go. I probably went about 15 hours into this one. I could keep playing it. The combat system I like a little better than Zesteria, but it still has this like brawler fighting game kind of feeling, and I don't love it. I don't like the combat system in either of these Tales of games. So that's ultimately why I sort of fell off of it. It also just has like a lot of modern video game tropes. I think this game came out in 2017 or 2018, and it's got a lot of like, it has a crafting system, and it has these little, you know, like a little sparkly thing on the map that you click on, you get an item, and it's very like, it's conservative in a lot of ways. Conservative video game design, and it's probably too long too. Like, I sort of feel like if it was 20 hours long, which almost none of these are, yeah, I probably would have beaten it and enjoyed it a lot. But it goes on and on. And yeah, so I didn't beat it, but it seems pretty cool. And if you like this kind of real time, sort of mashy combat system, I might recommend it. Yeah, and then the last one is Trails in the Sky. I think I did a podcast talking about this one. This one's going to be either a C or a D. I'm gonna go with C. I think because it has a few strengths. One of the best strengths about it is that the world is pretty detailed, and the NPCs, like, they update what they say every time you update the plot or whatever. You can come back and talk to the NPCs, and they all have different things going on. It's very richly realized in that sense. It's also just like a basically functional RPG. It's turn-based, but it has a grid, but the abilities don't really use the grid. So it's kind of weird because like you have a grid, but you're basically just doing like fire spells from Final Fantasy that are not grid-based. Later on, you start getting a couple of tactical things where it actually matters where you are, but for the most part, it never matters where you are on the grid, which is very strange. And overall, there's a system in here that's kind of like Final Fantasy VII Materia, but like a way more boring version of that. Everything is a little too boring in Trails in the Sky. There's not enough interesting abilities. And it goes on and on and on and on. I went like 30 hours into this one, and I just fell off of it. I mean, so in plot wise, it's got a lot of weird, gross things that I did not enjoy at all. There's a lot in this about like you guys are you and your main, you have two main characters. It's kind of like a dual protagonist plot, and the compelling thing about the game, I think, is supposed to be their love story, which sort of pokes its head every 10 hours or so. But other than that, it's basically the two of you going around and like beating up bad guys. And the way it's presented, it's a little bit weird and fashy for me. It's like you're like cops for the royalty going around and like beating up poor people basically, and like talking about using like enhanced interrogation techniques on people. And it's just like there's a lot of stuff that does not age well, I guess we could put it that way, in this game. But mostly it's just kind of boring. I mean, I think the Trails series is really interesting because they split up these plots over many, many games. So like you kind of can't play Trails in the Sky 2 without playing Trails in the Sky 1 first. And you can't really play 3 without playing 2. So, they all are building towards this thing, which is cool if you have infinite time to play RPGs. But for most people, it's like a snail's pace at which it actually unfolds meaningful plot events. There's all this like, go over here and like, oh, there was an orphanage and somebody burned it down. Who did it? Oh, let's go get them. And then like, it's kind of like the Dragon Quest thing of like potpourri events that you're dealing with. So I definitely fell off of it at a certain point. If either the combat system or the story was better, I would be interested. Next up, I do plan on skipping ahead a bit and playing Cold Steel, which was I think in the early 2000s. This was like late. This was actually this was in the early 2000s. So I think Cold Steel is maybe late 2000s, early 2010s, something like that. And so I'm interested to see where the series goes because I do think that there's potential in their combat system, but it's just unrealized. And so yeah, that wraps it up for today. Thanks. Let me know what you think, and if you have any recommendations or comments in the comments in the comments. That's where they go. All right. Thanks for watching.